and welcome to this session of the Cambridge Festival. As Josh said, I'm Senior Commissioning Editor. I work in the medical books team at Cambridge University Press, developing new publications in clinical psychology and mental health. Thank you for joining us today, and I'm delighted to introduce you all to Dr. Charlotte Markey, who is Professor of Psychology and Founding Director of the Health Sciences Centre at Rutgers University Camden in the US. She's a world-leading expert in body image research and has dedicated her career over the last 25 years to studying all things body image and eating behaviours. She's passionate about understanding what makes us feel good about our bodies and also helping others to develop a positive body image. Dr. Markey's latest book, Being You, the Body Image Book for Boys, publishes today. Congratulations, Charlotte, and follows the success of her companion book, The Body Image Book for Girls, Love Yourself and Grow Up Fearless. These books provide boys and girls with fun and engaging guides to understanding what body image is, why it matters, and how they can accept and appreciate their bodies. Living in the media-saturated world that we all do, with influencers, celebrities, and advertising at every turn, it's possibly not that surprising, but still pretty heartbreaking, that the majority of our young people, and that's boys as well as girls, are dissatisfied with their bodies. But what impact does this have on physical and mental well-being through teen years and beyond into adulthood? And what can we do to help our young people so they're not weighed down by body image worries? What advice can we give as parents, caregivers, aunts, uncles, friends? And how do we even begin to have those conversations? With two school-aged children myself, and knowing that there will be teenagers in the blink of an eye, these are questions often on my mind. So I'm so glad to have Dr. Markey's books on hand, and of course to have her here with us now to provide her insight and guidance and help us navigate this topic with our teens. So let me hand over to Dr. Markey now, who has a talk for us all for the next 30 minutes or so. And following this, we should have plenty of time for her to take your questions. So please drop those into the Q&A box, and I will come to those at the end. Dr. Markey, thank you so much for being here. Over to you.
Thank you so much to Sarah and to everyone at Cambridge University Press, but especially to Sarah, without whom I am certain these books would not even exist. She has really been an important part of making this all happen. So let me just get my slides the way they should be. I assume someone will tell me if they are not looking as they should to everybody else. Thank you to everyone who's joining us today. I really appreciate you spending the next half hour or hour, however long we go exactly today. I named this presentation Becoming Body Positive, an Evidence-Based Approach, because although I am really excited about my latest book, Being You, the Body Image Book for Boys, which, as Sarah mentioned, comes out today, I also really wanted to talk about the research recommendations that led not just to this book, but the companion book for girls. And although the target readership for these books are tweens and teens, a lot of the recommendations in these books really can apply across genders and ages. Being You is actually my fourth book project. The aim of all of these book projects has been to bring scientific research about body image to a wider public audience. In working on the first two books I wrote that were targeted for adults, I really became convinced that bringing this information to younger people was important, because people would reach out to me and tell me about their own body image concerns and how long they had suffered with those concerns. And I started to think more and more, we need prevention. We need to keep this from happening so that people don't spend decades of their lives concerned about body image. The two body image books, which I'll be talking about today, are my attempt at something resembling prevention for young people. I also want to note before advancing to the next slide that all of the images in this presentation come from the books themselves. It was truly a delight to be able to write something and then have illustrators and a team of people work with me to make it all come to life. And I'm just always looking for an opportunity to show off some of what the illustrators came up with. Before getting any further, let me just review a few of the basics. Most often when we talk about body image, we're referring to our thoughts and feelings about our bodies. However, across my career, I've really come to believe that the definition of body image is more complex than just the thoughts and feelings that we have about our bodies. Because when we think about this definition, thoughts and feelings about our bodies, or even if you expand it to appearance, it actually has a tendency to sound somewhat superficial, something that young people might experience out of concern for a developing body or because of what their friends are wearing to school that day. Really, though, what's become increasingly apparent to me is that body image affects our behaviors. And so whether or not we engage in physical activity or how we eat is really intricately linked with our body images. Our interpersonal relationships also differ depending on our experience of body image. Who we engage with, where we're willing to go, whether or not we're willing to put ourselves into new positions, all seem to be associated with our body image. And of course, mental health is very much associated with body image. Individuals' experience of anxiety, depression, and of course, eating disorders are all associated with body image. So when do concerns about body image even start? In the first research paper I ever published, I found that 20% of 5-year-old girls reported some degree of body dissatisfaction. In more recent research that I've worked on, I've found that up to 90% of women report being dissatisfied with some aspect of their body or appearance. You'll notice that the numbers, these percents, are a little bit lower for boys and men. And yet by adulthood, the majority of individuals will typically claim that they are not satisfied with their bodies, that they are considering how to change their bodies, or they have concerns about their body image. And the turning point for this really seems to be the adolescent years. During the adolescent years, individuals start to focus more on their bodies and their appearance, and mental health also develops in such a way that this becomes a real concern among young people. There's no evidence that these concerns are diminishing. In fact, since I published this first journal article back in 2000, focused on 5-year-old girls, there have been several papers looking at both boys and girls who are 4 and 5 and 6, and they seem to find pretty consistent results that these concerns and awareness of body and appearance and these mental health issues are already emerging. There's also been evidence that the collective trauma of the pandemic these past 2 years has contributed to increases in both body dissatisfaction and disordered eating. So unfortunately, these concerns are not going away, and we need to, I think, become more proactive in thinking about how to improve body image among young people. Rates of body dissatisfaction and the consequences of body dissatisfaction has really been the focus of the majority of this research since research on body image began in the 1980s. there was really no research on body image, and for that matter, on eating disorders until about the mid-1980s. And that's when this work really began to evolve. And this work, the body image and eating disorder research, pretty much evolved alongside one another for many years. But recently, in the last decade or so, there's been a growing number of researchers who are interested in reframing this area of study and trying to think more about, well, who does feel good about their bodies? Who is positive about how they feel? And with that being said, how can we then help other people to feel that way? So interestingly, in the last 10 years or so, as this work in the academic literature has started to come out, there's also a popular culture movement that's become much more evident, looking at what's known as body positivity, or sometimes on social media, even just BOPO. But that movement is not so new. It really stems from the fat liberation movement, which emerged as part of the civil rights movement. So those ideas about feeling comfortable in one's own skin, feeling proud of who you are, no matter how you look or what your body size, have been around for a very long time, but it's really social media and in the last decade or so where this interest in how do we do this? How do we all become more comfortable with ourselves? How do we all have more positive body image has started to emerge. Mateo is one of the young men that I interviewed in working on my book for boys. And I wanted to share this quote from our interview. These interviews can be found in both books, but I thought that his quote here kind of nicely sums up a lot of what we're talking about when we're talking about what is positive body image, because you can see that he's appreciating that people have different body types, and he's really expressing this degree of self-acceptance. What I want to do for the rest of our time together now is explain some actual research studies and how those led me to develop some advice about how to improve our own and our kids and other people we care about body image. And so the idea is to try to make some direct connections between some of the empirical literature, some of the more practical advice, and to really share what I think are some actionable ideas. And again, my goal is to offer some advice that spans, for the most part, across age and gender. And in both books, I do offer some specific information for those that identify as male versus female. But I think a surprising amount of advice is really applicable to pretty much all of us. So starting with this first piece here of advice, which is to focus a little bit more on body functionality with the goal of trying to improve our body image. We all get a lot of messages about the importance of our appearance. Can you think back and remember a time when you didn't care about your appearance? At some point, probably in your early childhood, you weren't really worried about your appearance or how others perceived you. And then at some point, probably before you can even remember, you started to have concerns or at least an awareness of how others perceived you. You learned to be concerned about these things from the people around you and the culture around you. But what if all of us spent a little more time thinking about what our bodies do and less about how they actually look? Or in the words of both Lexi and Lindsay Kite, who co-founded an organization called Beauty Redefined, what if we think about our bodies as instruments and not ornaments. A recent study actually encouraged people to think about the functionality of their bodies with the interest of trying to promote their positive body image. And what they did is they actually had participants engage in a writing task where they would write about and focus on all the amazing things that their body can do. So it was a pretty simple intervention. And you'll see across this talk that these sorts of interventions are often pretty simple and pretty time limited, but to at least some degree also effective. Individuals who are tasked with writing about their body's functionality actually seem to experience an improvement in their body satisfaction. Cecile is a young woman who I spoke with when I was working on the body image book for girls. And Cecile had had a number of health issues when she was younger. And so she had a really acute appreciation of the importance of your body working, your body functioning well. And I love how in this quote from her story, she said, "Focus on how you feel. If your doctor says your body is functioning properly, then you are good to go." So my first piece of advice for all of us is to spend a little more energy thinking about how our bodies function. My second piece of advice is to reframe how we think about food. There's a lot of misinformation in public spaces about basic nutrition. And many of us grow up with a really fraught relationship with food. But this doesn't have to be. We can enjoy food, we can experience food as pleasurable, and we can also use food still to nourish ourselves physically. But one thing we have to do is rethink a lot of the messages we've received about food. Carbohydrates, for example, are not evil. You may have heard from many places that you should limit or avoid carbohydrates, but all nutritional scientists will agree that they are an important part of a balanced diet. Many of us take all these messages that we hear about food and grow up feeling guilty about what we eat, trying to avoid certain foods, and often just really stressed about eating instead of enjoying food. A lot of my own research has focused in one way, shape, or form on how eating behaviors are associated with body image. So in this study, we actually found that women, but not men, that engage in maladaptive eating behaviors. So they try to avoid food, or they skip meals, or they purge. They were more likely to also experience depression. So I think this is just one of many studies, my own and others, that make it clear that so much of how we feel about our bodies is derived from what we put into them. Our culture teaches us to experience guilt if we eat fried foods or fast food or sweet treats. And we often get the message that we should feel virtuous if we have a kale smoothie or a salad. But it really doesn't have to be this way. We deserve a healthy relationship with food, and we also want our children to develop a healthy relationship with food. Gabrielle was one of the girls that I spoke with when I was working on the body image book for girls. And her discussion about food was really interesting to me because she had recently decided to become a vegetarian. Now, I'm not here to suggest vegetarianism to anyone, but what I liked in my conversation with Gabrielle is that she was really thoughtful about her food choices. And she was thoughtful in a way that considered how she felt when she ate, and she was thoughtful in terms of her impact on the world. So she was thinking already at 14 years old about the environmental impact of what she ate. And she wasn't linking food and food choice to her body and body size and weight so much. She was really thinking in terms of sort of a psychologically and really socially oriented place. And I thought that was just really impressive. And I think all of us can be thoughtful about our food choices, but also just not tortured by them, so that we can still really enjoy food. So in addition to thinking about how amazing our bodies are, we want to nourish them in a pleasurable way. We also want to think about our media use. And I know this may sound like advice for kids, and I do often offer this advice to kids, but I think that actually all of us need to think about our media use, because many of us fall prey to media misinformation. And one of the reasons for this is because we increasingly interact with media information in a way that's very different than what was possible just even 10 years ago. So we can select what shows we're watching. We curate news feeds and social media. We really pick what we see. And what that leads to is what's known as confirmation bias. We seek out information that conforms to our already held beliefs for the most part. We don't get an array of ideas to consider in the same way that we would have a decade ago. We don't get other people's opinions to debate with or to reconsider. We just sort of end up in these sort of thought silos, really, where we're not necessarily learning from media as much as just confirming a lot of what we already think. Recent research has made it pretty clear that social media in particular may present a risk when it comes to body image. This article here that just came out last month suggests, though, that if we are critical in our use of social media or develop our own media literacy skills, that social media may have a less negative effect on our mental health and body image in particular. And so what this intervention actually did was ask participants to really think more about, when they were using social media, the intention behind the posts, what was going on, and what were people motivated by in posting certain things. And this seemed to really help to mitigate the negative effect. If people could start to parse out, well, this is sort of commercial, or people are showing me their best self, this isn't really realistic. This then seemed to really help people to sort of think more critically about their media experience, in particular social media. One of the young men that I interviewed had very strong feelings about the ways that people present themselves, both on social media and in real life. And he expressly stated, says Lucas here, that he wanted that all younger people, he wanted people to understand that perfect bodies are fake, the modern perfect body is fake, that we all should focus more on feeling good, and that needs to come from within. And so he was really critical of the media in a way that I think exemplifies this advice, right? Not just taking it at face value. We'll return to another quote from Lucas later, because he really had a lot of interesting things to say. So again, we want to think about our bodies as the amazing things that they are, the vehicles that carry us through life. We want to nourish them in a way that's enjoyable, and we want to be really careful about our media consumption. We also want to be active in a way that is enjoyable. As people age, even just during adolescence and young adulthood, being physically active often starts to feel like more of a chore. So when we're young, we run around with our friends and we're kind of naturally inclined to be more active in our daily lives. And then as we get older, sometimes activity can start to feel like an obligation, not really a pleasure. The main problem with this is that when activity feels like an obligation, it's often harder to sustain. And we know that physical activity has many benefits for both our mental and physical health and our body image. But we need to do things that we enjoy in order to reap those benefits over the long term. In this study, the researchers actually examined yoga as a body image intervention. And there have actually been a number of studies that look at both yoga and positive body image. And I think part of why these two areas have really come together is because the philosophy behind yoga actually aligns really well with the philosophy behind positive body image. So both emphasize movement as a way to enjoy and appreciate the body, and also to experience what we sometimes call positive embodiment. So in this study, it was a 12-week yoga practice, and some individuals were in the experimental group where they were asked to participate in yoga for 12 weeks, and then there was a control group who didn't do yoga. And what they found at the end of the study is that the participants actually were less preoccupied with their appearance, and they were more satisfied with their appearance for being physically active. Leslie was one of the women I spoke with when I was working on the body image book for girls. And she expressed a lot of ambivalence about her body. And this was pretty common. And I think most of us can probably relate to this, this sense of maybe trying to feel good about ourselves, but just not always quite getting there. What I liked in my discussion with Leslie, though, is how she really did value how her body could move and be active, and that she appreciated when she was athletic, when she was doing something physically active, that she felt good about herself. And that was really encouraging. I sort of saw what the research shows in my discussion with her, that physical activity can perhaps improve body image. I wanted to share one more quote though here, and this is from Arjun, a young man I spoke with when I was working on the book for boys, because I think especially when we're speaking to boys and men, oftentimes when they use physical activity as a way to improve their sense of self or their body image, they can take it to an extreme. And so I think Arjun's quote here kind of counterbalances Leslie's a little bit. And he's saying it's important to remember at the end of the day, a good body won't get you into a good college or get you a good job, right? So he's saying working out is important, but not like the end all be all, that there are other things we need to do too. So be active, but don't overdo it. So we want to focus on how our bodies work and how amazing they are, how they help us live our lives. We want to nourish ourselves. We want to think critically about the media. We want to try to be active in ways that we enjoy and that aren't taken to too much of an extreme. And we also want to be grateful. Now, I know this is where the talk can maybe start to feel a little bit new agey and pop psychology like. But I want to assure you there actually is a growing amount of research that looks at practicing gratitude as a way to improve mental health and body image in particular. This is a study that I worked on with two colleagues that actually asked people. It was a brief intervention. Again, there was a writing task involved. We asked people to write about parts of their bodies that they were grateful for. So that was the experimental group. The control group wrote about a vacation they were grateful for. So something pretty different. This was a really brief intervention. It turns out that a lot of men are very grateful for their hair, especially with age. But the important finding here is that the experimental condition, those that were focusing on body gratitude, also reported after the experiment greater body satisfaction. Oops, I overshot that, I guess. All right. Levi, I interviewed for the body image book for boys. And I think that his quote here really illustrates the importance of gratitude. And I loved sort of the way he framed this, the way he said this. He said, I think it's so easy for us to get stuck in a body image sort of rabbit hole that I hate everything about my body. But we have to stop that. We have to stop from spiraling into this place and focus on what we do like and focus on even just more non-appearance qualities. So I really like when I can see young people thinking outside of sort of these popular media messages that do focus on appearance so much and are thinking more about what they're happy about. That just feels so rewarding to me. The sixth piece of advice I want to offer is to question the culture. Most days I feel incredibly grateful to be a body image researcher. I think that body image is incredibly interesting. It's incredibly complicated. And I love doing this work. But there are some days where I feel frustrated. It feels like the culture that surrounds all of us is just so appearance-centric and sort of toxic. And we all get these messages that we need to transform ourselves. We should fix ourselves. We're not okay the way we are. And this leads to so much anxiety and distress for so many people. This frustration typically then continues to motivate me. And I wanted to share this really recent piece of research that I think is relevant to this idea of questioning the culture. So when this research came out last month, I actually spoke with a couple of reporters about it because they thought it was counterintuitive. But follow along and see what you think, if it's actually counterintuitive. So some of you may be aware that physical appearance ideals have started to shift somewhat for women. So for several decades, appearance ideals for women were predominantly just very slender, almost prepubertal looking, often somewhat emaciated looking. And in recent years, sort of the Kardashian body has become much more favored. And so women are desiring to be not just slender around their midsection, but also to be really full-breasted and full-bottomed, sort of curvaceous. So in this research, what they did is they actually compared how viewing images of the old ideal thinness compared to the new ideal, the Kardashian slim, thick body, as it's sometimes called. And then everyone seemed really surprised to find that this new ideal, even though it wasn't as thin, actually made girls and women feel worse about their bodies. But if you think about it, this new ideal is a body that is really virtually impossible to obtain without surgery. So it makes sense that it makes people feel bad about themselves. It's an impossibility beyond what even the old ideal suggested. So yes, maybe we're seeing more body diversity, and yet that diversity still remains pretty unobtainable for the most part. These are ideals I think we need to question. And we need to question a culture that suggests that these things are even a possibility in terms of how we look. Annie was a very smart and thoughtful girl that I spoke with. She actually participated in one of the focus groups I ran evaluating the chapters for the girls' book. And she said a number of really thoughtful things, and I asked her if I could interview her then for the book. And I love this quote from her. She says, over time, I realized that hating yourself just shouldn't be the default. Although that's what's portrayed as normal in the media, it's just not healthy. Everyone should love themselves no matter what. Dawson echoes Annie's sentiment here. And he says, my advice to younger boys is to know that every person looks different. There is not just one definition of what people are supposed to look like. And I like that both these young people seem to be questioning so many of the messages that they are inevitably seeing that suggest that basically we should all look the same. We should all look pretty much a certain way. So it can be hard in many ways to sort of question what's completely normalized. But I think also in talking with young people, it's incredibly important to really get them to start to question what they're seeing and hearing around them. And then my last piece of advice is to take it one step further and to actually see what we can do to change the culture. In my last chapter of both the book for girls and the book for boys, I offer some sort of summary of the advice throughout the book. And I also really intend to try to inspire young people, because I think I wouldn't keep working on books like this. I wouldn't keep doing this work if I didn't actually think that we ultimately have some power in changing some elements of the culture that we live in. Just one decade ago, there was literally no research on positive body image. And just a few years ago, I wrote this chapter with two colleagues, and we were kind of marveling at this new area of study and how we were going to hopefully be able to help people feel better about themselves. But we've come a long way in just a few years even. And I think we've started to understand a lot more about what is possible. And that gives me a great deal of hope in terms of ultimately changing the culture. Alyssa is a girl that I interviewed and working on the body image book for girls. And she's actually the first girl that I interviewed. She was only 15 at the time. And I interviewed her. She was my trial run in some ways because she was the daughter of one of my best friends. And they live in California, very far away from where I live. So I very rarely see Alyssa, but I was grateful that she sat down and spoke with me over the phone about all of the issues I was going to be trying to include in the body image book for girls. And what I noticed the most, I remember kind of getting chills while I was talking with her because she sounded so much like her mom. I could hear my friend, her mom's voice as she was speaking. And I remember at one point, she even said something kind of like, I don't know, I think as far as this body image stuff goes, you just have to fake it until you make it. And it sounded so much to me like something her mom would say. And I had this moment where I thought, we can do this. We can help the next generation. Listen to this kid. Her mom's done it. She's helped her to understand that she can change things. She doesn't have to accept the status quo. We can all enact some change so that the next generation will be better off and we can live our adult lives less constrained by some of the cultural messages that we receive. I'll leave you, though, with another quote from Lucas. And I just couldn't have put this any better myself. He says, I just wish everyone would take a step back and say, hey, we're all pretty beautiful already. I really wish society put less importance on things like beauty and a bit more on things like emotions and how we treat each other. Life is not a beauty contest. This is not all of the advice that can be derived from the growing body of research that examines body image and specifically positive body image. And these aren't the only studies that support some of these bits of advice I've shared with you today. But I think that this is a good place for many of us to start, even if we just pick one thing on this list and think about how we can include it in our own lives and try to impart it to the kids that we either parent or teach or care for in one way, shape, or form. When I proposed to write the body image book for girls, I thought I would write about a 100-page book, and that would just suffice in covering this research literature. And even though at that point I had been doing research in this area for over 20 years, it really wasn't until I started working on the book that I appreciated just how much we know. And the book became 200 pages long. And then the book for boys was even a little bit longer. And now the book I'm working on is already looking like it's going to be longer. And although I aim to, of course, always make what I do accessible to people and not belabor anything, I think it's just so important to appreciate that there's a lot we know. There's a lot we can do to improve our own and others' body image. And my work in this area has increasingly convinced me that positive body image is a key ingredient in well-being. And in order to be well-adjusted human beings, we need to nurture our own and the next generation's positive body image. It has been a real privilege to focus on these book projects in recent years. It's really nothing short of a professional dream come true to be able to spend time looking through the scientific evidence, talking with young people, trying to put it all on a page, and then have a design team and editing team and marketing team rally around you to try to bring that information to the public. There have been so many people who have made this all possible that are not even, they would never all fit on this slide, but I am eternally grateful to all of them. And as we said at the beginning today, the boys' book is available as of today. So please go out and get that if you have a boy in your life. And the girls' book is, of course, available still too. And with that, I'm happy to address any questions that people might have.
Thank you, Charlotte, for your talk. So interesting. And I've got to say, so uplifting to see those insightful comments and quotes from young people and that are obviously taken from the books. And I think we've all got a lot that we can learn from those wonderful young people, and just makes you feel good about what's to come in the future. So we've got a few questions come in, so I'll put those to you. So first up, we have why have eating disorder diagnoses increased during and after the lockdowns?
Yeah, I think there's a number of reasons why concerns as far as eating disorders and really mental health more generally have surged in these last couple of years. And when it comes to eating disorders in particular, some of it has to do with some of the social isolation many people experienced, lack of social support, lack of resources when it came to mental health, or if someone was already experiencing an eating disorder or on the verge of experiencing one, the stress, especially in the early days of the pandemic, was really triggering for a lot of people. I think that mental health has declined for most of us across these last couple of years. And some of the data looking at adolescents in particular is really concerning. I know in both the US and the UK, there is pretty clear data that the rates of diagnoses of eating disorders just since 2020 have nearly doubled. So we are really dealing with an increase in these problems, and they're so complex. We can't point to just one thing. It wasn't like being in lockdown wasn't worth it. I would never say something like that as a health psychologist, or there's not a simple one thing we can point to. But I think that a combination of factors, many people experienced food insecurity in ways that they maybe hadn't previously. So So there are many, many factors that contributed. It definitely has been an issue though.
Certainly a difficult time for everyone over the last couple of years.
Yeah.
So up next, why do messages about food essentially demonize some foods? What's the cause of this? And could this contribute to eating disorders?
Yeah, I mean, I'll start by saying that I don't think most messaging about food is intended to be harmful. At least not most of it. But I think whenever we start to try to eliminate entire food groups or to feel like we can't have certain things, what then happens is that we usually want them that much more. And this creates this sort of stressful experience where mentally we're thinking a lot about, oh, I can't have that cookie, but I want that cookie. I can't have that. It can really take over a lot of mental space. And yes, it can contribute to disordered eating. A lot of what's prescribed for weight loss is essentially disordered eating, right? If you're being prescribed a 900 calorie a day diet for whatever reason, or told to skip breakfast, or, people get all kinds of crazy ideas about dieting, and they may work in the short term. They may be very effective initially, but pretty much all of the research we have suggests that by 2 years after starting a weight loss regimen, most people are going to gain back every single pound they've lost, because these are just not sustainable approaches to healthy living. And I think I'm starting to get on a tangent here and I'm losing sight of the question. So maybe Sarah can get me on track.
Diets are bad news and we shouldn't diet.
Diets are bad news, right? That doesn't mean just eat everything all the time, whatever you want, but there's a lot of space between don't eat anything that's been ever called unhealthy and just eat anything and everything, right? Like there is a lot of space in between there where we can enjoy and celebrate with foods we like that are indulgent, and yet maybe not do that all the time. So sort of this place of balance, it can be hard to find, but is worth aiming for.
So next question is, what do you think are the main reasons people dislike their bodies? And are some people more susceptible to sources of negativity?
Yeah, first, I think the second part of the question, some people are certainly more susceptible. We all come into the world with some personality qualities that are not fixed necessarily, but at least biological predispositions. So some of us are going to come into the world feeling more confident and more secure with ourselves. And then it's going to be easier to withstand any sort of pressure that we experience around us. Some people, based on their family life experiences, may become more vulnerable. If you live in a household where food is talked about in really maladaptive ways, or you're teased a lot for your appearance, then those are risk factors we know as well. And Sarah, help me remember the other part of the question.
So you said about the main reasons people dislike their bodies, and if some people are more susceptible. So yeah, I think you've kind of covered that.
Okay. All right. Yeah.
So how do you think attitudes towards our bodies can change on a large scale?
I mean, I think we're already seeing some change in the last 5 years or so in terms of some advertisement and some marketing focusing on including more body diversity. So not just the Kim Kardashian body, but true diversity. So that's incredibly encouraging. And what's interesting about the current media environment is that because we can curate what we see to such a large extent, we can help select, the media spaces we want to exist. And so if we are not going to, shop certain places because they don't have inclusive sizing, or if we're not going to click on those ads on our Instagram newsfeed because it seems like it's they're not presenting diverse bodies or whatever it may be, there are lots of little decisions we make almost every day that can help to, I think, shift sort of the media climate in terms of being more size inclusive and being more psychologically healthy in terms of how we view people of different body sizes.
Thank you. So one of the things that I just wanted to ask you, and one of the things when I first read some draft material from your girls' book many years ago that has stuck with me is this idea of fat talk that we all around us, like when we're talking to our friends or our parents, that they comment on their bodies in a sort of derogatory way. You know, I'm so fat, or my hair looks terrible, my nose is so big. And the sort of reaction from us is then to say, oh no, you look great, like I'm so fat and like I look a mess, and that, and now when you start to think about it, you notice it all around you, and what can we do about that when we experience it in our lives?
Yeah, it's challenging because we've been socialized to engage in these sorts of exchanges, and especially I think among women, it's almost a way we bond with one another, right? We reassure one another. But at the end of the day, it's really kind of maladaptive because everyone's talking about what they don't like about themselves. And, I think there's actually research on this, and it suggests that we should either basically shift the topic is one option, right? So if your mom says that, oh, I need to lose weight, you can say like, well, I don't think that's true. What about the weather today? So try to shift the topic a little bit. Or we could also, what seems to be even more helpful, but I think is a lot harder, is to challenge it. And I think this is probably more important when we're talking with young people. So if they say like, oh, I don't, like the way I look, you say, like, challenging those thoughts instead of joining in sounds like, well, why would you say that? Did someone say that to you? Do you think that how people look is the most important thing? Are there other things that you value about yourself? Let me tell you some things that I really value about you. And I think even very small kids understand that our appearance has some value. So we don't have to pretend like this is like a non-existent issue. I think that just actually makes us look silly to young kids. Probably they'd be like, well, everyone knows like I have a big nose, like what's, but I think we really can help young people to kind of keep it all in perspective better, and to get them to just sort of think outside of that and think like, well, all right, maybe my nose is too big, but who really cares? I have great hair and I'm really good at baseball and whatever, like that's kind of who I am. I think some of us adults didn't have that input when we were younger. I think it's really hard to come to that place if you've spent decades of your life kind of focused on your faults and commiserating with other people about them. But I can see it in some young people I know where I think they've been socialized differently, and they're like, it doesn't really matter. Who really cares? Like, that's just who you are.
I think there's this feeling as well that if we don't respond with a complaint about our own bodies, if we hear someone complaining about theirs, that they might think that we're arrogant or that we think we're perfect. So is that an issue as well, that you feel like you have to say something bad about yourself, otherwise people will think you're really arrogant?
I mean, I think we can't completely control what other people think of us, right? So I don't know that then joining in a maladaptive practice because we're concerned about others' thoughts is always going to bring us what we want anyways. And we can just say like, I'm sorry you feel that way. That's not how I see you. And, I just really find I feel better about myself if I don't talk about things in this way. Or I'm really working to create a home environment for my kids where we just focus less on our appearance. Or, I understand that this is something that's stressful to you. That's not how I see you. I had a text exchange with my own sister the other day, and she was saying some things that she didn't like about herself. And I just decided to be really direct for the first time ever. And I just said, like, no, your lips are not too small. You're great. And just change the subject. Because I thought, I'm not going to do this. I'm not going to do this with you. She's a very beautiful person and I adore her. And I want to focus on that. I don't want to focus on like this sort of make believe, or what feels to me like a make believe concern, because it's, of course it feels real to her. So you don't need to invalidate completely, of course, but kind of move on.
I guess one of the thoughts I sometimes have as well is about if you're working to improve your body image and be more mindful of those around you as well, like, is the goal to just feel great about your body every single day? So you wake up and you think, oh, I'm amazing, I'm so grateful for your body, and is that the goal, and is that what we're hoping to all achieve?
I'm a psychologist. I think it would be great if everyone woke up every morning and thought, like, I'm amazing. Like, that would be in some ways, we'll all be out of business, I guess. But no, I don't think that that's a realistic goal for probably just about anybody. There are things all of us dislike about ourselves. There are things all of us will perseverate on and stress about. I think the goal is to just be in line with the definition of positive body image in this area of literature, to be more accepting, to be more appreciative, to be more grateful, to think about functionality. I think that these are things that can become more natural if you do it more, right? If you spend a lot of time fussing over your appearance and you just try to not do that as much, or same thing goes with eating. If you felt like you had to be really restrictive, if you just decide that you're going to try to kind of expand your repertoire of foods that you eat, and you can do that gradually. So a lot of it involves a shift of focus and some commitment. And it doesn't always feel really natural at first, but I do believe it's really possible, and I do see it in young people more. I think it's easier if you haven't spent a lot of time doing one thing, But I don't think that we have to always feel like, oh, I'm perfect, and certainly we don't want to seem like just arrogant. But I think some of this we just have to gradually work on. It's just like everything, right? Our physical health, our mental health. People like to think like you have it or you don't, or you go to a doctor and you get a pill or whatever. But as a health psychologist, my view is very much that, like, we're all works in progress. We all need to tend to our physical and mental health, and that's sort of part of our lifelong journey, and that there are a lot of benefits to doing so. And that's okay. We shouldn't feel in any way inadequate that, like, we're going to attend to this or try to better ourselves, whether it be physically or psychologically.
Well, thank you, Charlotte. That's the end of the questions. And thank you so much for your time this evening or today, wherever you're listening in the world. Just a really uplifting summary of the things that we can do to improve our own body image and for those around us. And as Charlotte said, the two books that she talks about, the book for girls and for boys, are available if you've got any young girls or boys in your lives. And I've read those books myself, and there are so many helpful and valuable pieces of information in there for adults alike. So I would recommend them to everyone. Thank you for everyone who's been listening today. And thank you, Dr. Markey.
Thank you to Sarah for making all of this really a reality. So.